Good afternoon. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is Monday, February 10th, 2025, 2:20 in the afternoon. Continuing our romp through the FY26 budget, and we have with us Big Hartman from the Human Rights Commission to talk about their budget. So thank you for coming and for flexing on the time a little bit. We appreciate you coming a little earlier.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So we have people online. Yes, I was here. We're piloting a project for Monday afternoon, so not everybody has to come up on Monday.
Right. Great. And I think Jason Pinard was going to join as well, who is the person I work with at Finance and Management.
Okay.
Financial Services Division, I think. He.
Not on the Zoom yet.
Okay. Oh, because he's probably planning on 3:30.
I'll send him an email. Right?
Yeah, I should be able to walk us through this, and then if I have some of their detailed questions, Jason's my man.
Okay.
So for the record, I'm Big Hartman. I'm the Executive Director and General Counsel at the State of Vermont Human Rights Commission. I use they, them pronouns. I was just here not too long ago sharing with you all about the work of the Human Rights Commission. So I'm not sure how much of a refresher folks want about what we do. But broadly, I'll share that we primarily are tasked with enforcing the Vermont Fair Housing and Public Accommodations Act, as well as the Fair Employment Practices Act as it applies to state employees. So we are largely engaged in conducting investigations and engaging in enforcement action in court as needed. And we are extremely busy, especially lately. So I'm not exactly sure how much information to review with you on this.
So yes, we talked a lot about what you did,
Yeah.
which is great, but I think you have, and what we talked about before was a request that was just for FY25. And so now we want to talk about the whole, what you think you need for FY26. I'm also interested, that you have this HUD grant and there's a little bit of chaos and uncertainty happening in Washington these days, and be interested to know, how that's impacting you, if it has, or how you think it might, just so we have a better understanding of what's happening.
Okay, sure. Maybe I'll start there.
Okay.
So we have a contract with HUD to do the fair housing investigations and enforcement actions for cases that are dual filed, meaning that they implicate both state fair housing law and federal fair housing law. And HUD pays us kind of a base administrative fee, and then they pay us per case closure. And if we file in court, we get an additional payment for that in just the fair housing cases. Historically, we have been getting 90,000 or less each year. We are receiving a little bit more this year than we had originally planned for, because it is very dependent on how many cases you actually close out during the course of the year and how they close. But it's tended to be under 10% of our overall operating budget. So for fiscal year 26, it's budgeted at receiving $92,000 this coming year, and that's 8% of the proposed budget. The word from HUD lately is that no one knows that there will be any big changes in terms of these fair housing enforcement activities. I don't know whether that could change tomorrow, but we have not been receiving word that they are changing any of the funding structure that's in place, that's contracts. We are being told that there are certain cases they are no longer willing to accept for dual filing, which are really only cases that pertain to gender identity discrimination. We will still be pursuing those cases under state law. We just won't expect to get paid by HUD for those cases.
Okay, so you can still pursue them.
Yes, and we will.
John,
Dual funding at the state level and federal level. So she mentioned.
Dual filing is the expression, which means that it's filed with our agency for the state fair housing law violation, and it's filed with HUD as well for federal fair housing law violation. There's a similar structure in employment cases that are filed with us and with the Attorney General's Office Civil Rights Unit, and it's also dual filed with the EEOC under federal employment law.
Thanks. Got it.
I know.
We're a lawyer, we're not.
I just use these words all the time and they don't even faze me anymore.
Thanks.
So, so you won't dual file the gender identity ones because HUD is not going to accept those, but how many of those what is either the number or sort of the general percentage of cases revolve around that? Do you have any sense of that?
A very small percentage.
Yeah.
The majority of our cases involve disability discrimination.
Okay,
And then our second biggest category is race and color, and then sex. We haven't seen a large volume of gender identity discrimination cases thus far. We have some, and it could change.
yeah. Okay, great, thank you. Did you have a question? Yes.
Well, I think, well, in your presentation, my hope is, because, we don't live your life and we don't really know kind of what it is, how something moves from a complaint that is phoned in or an email to an actual case. And what you've asked for and have asked for maybe 5 years, at least as long as I've been here, and Representative Stevens can speak to the long-standing need, but you've asked for greater staffing to respond to increased needs. And I'm hopeful that in your presentation, you can kind of walk us through how the work flows and where the backlogs are, and how many the types of people on your staff and what they do. Just because you didn't have much of a chance to go over that when you spoke to us.
Great, sounds good.
Yeah, so like they call and then what happens? And then
Right.
what happens and then what happens?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So on page 4 of our budget book, and do you want me to be like on Zoom sharing the screen so that's visible for everyone? Would that be?
Does everybody have a copy of it? Does anybody need a screen? I think everybody's got a copy. I'm seeing.
I print things out and I'm.
No,
Old school.
Page 4 is the one with the pie chart and the
Yes.
slides. Okay.
So this has a little bit of summary of what we were just talking about with our HUD funding. And the second bullet point under summary and highlights describes how we have 7 exempt positions. That's our total staff. Myself is one. We have an executive staff assistant position. That's our only administrative staff member. Then we have our Director of Policy, Education and Outreach, Amanda Garces, who is often over here during this time of year monitoring legislative policy, and is also the Director of our Education and Outreach. It's really the only position, Amanda's position is the only one that isn't involved with enforcement and the cases that we work on. So we have 1 senior counsel. This is the new litigator position that was just created in fiscal year 24. That is now, as we speak today, has 15 lawsuits that he is in charge of. I made an excellent hire, if I do say for myself, in October of last year to bring a 30-year civil litigator up from DC who just happened to want to move to Vermont. We have 3 staff attorney investigators that are doing the day-to-day investigations of all of our complaints that are currently filed. So I'll flip you forward, if that's okay, to address your goal of seeing kind of the flow. And I'll encourage you to skip ahead to slide 11 of 22. Which says HRC process.
Thank you.
This is a little broad brush kind of flow chart I made for you. And starting on the left-hand side, our cases start with an intake process. We respond to phone calls and emails primarily. Those have historically only been fielded by the executive staff assistant, the administrative position who also handles all of the other administrative needs of the office, like invoice processing and things like that. I had that position turn over this past year due to the extreme stress and burnout of being the only person to answer the phone and do initial intakes. An intake process with discrimination is a highly charged, emotional, traumatic event that someone is describing to you, or a series of events. So we really take a lot of time and care to help people feel heard through our intake process. In some cases, it's going to be the only time they have to tell this story. And so it's very emotionally draining. And I have seen 2 people come and go in that position since I started working here. So my solution to the taxing nature of that work is to spread out the intakes now. And I'm fielding about half of the intakes, and the executive staff assistant is fielding about the other half. It's not a sustainable solution, but I didn't want to bring a new person on this summer and have them immediately go into overwhelm like the last person did who started, who was very competent. So we do a bit of a screening process in our intake, and that's when we're trying to assess if somebody can articulate the basic elements of their claim, if it's within our jurisdiction. A lot of times we're ending up referring people on because they're talking about a landlord-tenant dispute. That's not about discrimination, or they're talking about something that happened 5 years ago. That's too aged of a case for us to accept it. We're trying to filter them out and see if there's another resource for them that might be able to help. But oftentimes we are having to go through a lengthy intake process, an intake meeting. They're sending us documents, sometimes evidence of the discrimination that they feel they've experienced. And then the executive director makes a decision about whether or not we can accept that complaint for discrimination.
Do you refer to legal aid or the AG's office or other places too?
Those are the 2 most common. Employment cases, most of them are involving private employers, so we're sending them over to the Civil Rights Unit.
Okay.
The Vermont Legal Aid and Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity are the 2 main offices that we send folks to who are experiencing some other situation with their housing that might not be discrimination. And those folks are going to go there and get advocacy and maybe representation. They're not going to get an investigation like what we do.
And I see Rep. Harrison has a question.
Yeah, Beg, do any states consolidate them all into one umbrella? I mean, it seems from a consumer aspect, be a little bit confusing as to, I got an issue, I think I'm being discriminated. Who do I call? They might call you, but they really need to call legal aid because it's a private landlord-tenant issue, or I need to call the Attorney General's office because it's, a private employer. Is there any models out there that, have streamlined this so that we're being more accessible to the individual that feels they're being harmed?
Yes, great question. In most of the other states that I have interacted with, they have one Human Rights Commission or one agency against discrimination that is doing all of the investigations. So it's not separated with an AG's office doing some and the HRC doing the rest. Typically, they're all happening under one roof. But the services that our office provide is markedly different than the services provided by Vermont Legal Aid, who is providing legal representation. We are not doing that. We are conducting neutral investigations. So even when we take a case to court, we are not representing those individuals. We are not giving them legal advice about a settlement. We are enforcing the Public Accommodations and Fair Housing Act as the Human Rights Commission is the plaintiff.
Well, okay, I understand that, but would it make any difference, any sense, for example, to explore taking the Attorney General's Civil Rights Division and putting it under your shop?
I think it would be worth exploring that. That is, what I have noticed is that our offices operate under some different practices and procedures. We have this commission process and the Attorney General's office does not. Even parties to our cases have different rights to access our investigative file than they would have if they had an employment case at the Attorney General's office. And it's been, what I have seen is that other human rights commissions, or whatever they're called, are separate from the Attorney General's office. And they all are providing, under the same set of procedures and rules, the same types of investigations.
So have those conversations actually happened here or not?
I am not aware
Okay.
of those conversations. I have them with myself sometimes.
We all talk to ourselves. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm gonna bring us back to page 11. We got to the intake process. And I think the intake process is an extremely crucial function that our office provides. And it is very problematic that we do not have one dedicated person, or maybe even someday more than one, fielding those intakes. Especially in the last couple of weeks, people are feeling a heightened concern about their civil rights and their human rights. And so we are fielding between 20 and 30, sometimes 40 emails and calls a day from the public. And we're all really busy with busy schedules. So it's very hard to make the time to give meaningful responses to a lot of those inquiries that are coming in. And our intake process can sometimes take between 3 and 6 months to get to the point where, yes, I've accepted the complaint, and have I gotten a point in time where I can draft that complaint based on what they've told me? And then they have to get their complaint signed and notarized. It can take several months even to get to the point where finally the respondent, the person who's being accused of discrimination, receives notice of it existing as a complaint. So that doesn't happen until the complaint is received at our office and now it's under investigation. Historically, we've been able to assign an investigator the first day that the complaint is received, and that investigator can start working on gathering information right away. Right now, most of my new investigations are on hold, and I do not have an investigator assigned to new cases. They are on hold. I am the point of contact for these cases, and I simply cannot overburden my staff with more cases right now. But we are in a vacancy. We have 3 investigators. 1 turned over this year due to severe burnout. And so I'm bringing someone new in. But as of today, I have 30 cases on our docket that are unassigned. They're investigations that no one is working on.
And I have a question, then I'm going to turn it to Rep. Harrison. But is there a statute of limitations on when you have to start a case when they tell you? Because I know you said something happened 5 years ago and you can't do anything about that. But so do you have a time frame in which you actually have to get started?
The time frame we have to work with is that allegations need to be made to our office within 1 year.
Okay.
But we technically don't have a rule about how long investigations are supposed to take. We have a rule that says we will endeavor to complete them in 6 months. That hardly ever happens. HUD has a rule that 50% of our cases, our fair housing cases that are dual filed, should be closed within 100 days. That didn't happen a single time in the past fiscal year.
Okay.
So
The timeline
more than a
is
year.
them making the allegation to your office, and then after that, that's the point. Okay. And I've Jeff Pearson and then John. Jim?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Did we add a position or 2 positions to your office last year, or am I just remembering something that was an ask and we weren't able to do anything?
In fiscal year 24, we got one new position, which is for the litigator, the senior counsel that I hired last October. With the request that Bor Yang, my predecessor, had made for fiscal year 24 was for an investigator and a litigator, and we just got the one litigator.
Okay, so we gave 1 position, but this is going back fiscal year 24?
Yes.
Okay,
Last year, I was here talking to you about 3 positions that we were requesting. An
Yeah.
intake specialist, an investigator, and another outreach person.
Yeah.
And none of those materialized for fiscal year 25.
all right, thank you.
So when the 100 days comes to that point, in terms of the HUD guidelines, what happens then? Do they
They start bugging me.
start bugging you?
Yeah, HUD, I have to answer to any aged cases. We have to report what action we've taken on the case thus far and explain why it's taken so long. And we have to issue a letter to the parties at 100 days saying, you've reached 100 days, here's the reasons why. And if we repeatedly, fail to meet those deadlines for HUD, it could jeopardize our eligibility to continue to receive their grant, their contract. But they do performance monitoring. So right now I'm going through a process with HUD to explain why our cases take longer. And they could put you on like a performance improvement plan kind of thing to try to speed up your processing of your housing cases.
So they understand your capacity here currently,
They do.
and they've exceeded that.
Yeah, and then they just try to work with us to see if there are ways we can streamline at least our fair housing cases, which are at least half of our current cases.
Continue, please.
Okay, so we're at phase 2 of our little flow chart here on page 11, which is the investigative process. Like I said, this ends up taking more like a year, sometimes 2 years. When I was here talking with you last year and reporting on our case statistics for fiscal year 23, we averaged right around 650 days average case age at closure, which I did not feel was at all acceptable. It's very hard for investigators when cases are that old. It's extremely hard for the parties involved in those cases. This year, I implemented some changes and innovations to try to streamline our process. We were writing very long, detailed investigative reports to close our cases. Now we've just made them more succinct. We are not restating every fact that happened, and we are not providing a footnote for every single sentence. So our investigative reports are a little bit faster to write, and it's not as time consuming for staff. That has resulted in an improvement in our average case age, so that in fiscal year 24, we went down from an average age of 649 to 474. So major progress, still not at all where we want to be. That's still over a year, average. But sometimes in the middle of an investigation or towards the end of it, or even sometimes at the beginning, we're able to help the parties with a settlement, and our staff facilitate conversations about settlement throughout the process, which is required by our statute. But it's tricky because we're a neutral party, but it can be helpful because we can kind of serve as like a go-between for those conversations about settlement. Cases that don't settle, where the investigation gets completed, it culminates in a report that gets sent to the commissioners. The commissioners meet on a monthly basis. There's 5 appointed governor-appointed commissioners who serve 5-year terms. And they hear the cases and make a final determination on whether there's reasonable grounds to believe that discrimination occurred. This year in fiscal year 24, we had the highest number I could find on record of case closures by determinations. We had 33 determinations this year. 22 of them went reasonable grounds. So we have really had an uptick in our productivity, and at the same time, staff are really struggling with burnout. And I'm not getting new complaints, and we have a higher number of new complaints than before, from that were initiated in fiscal year 24. So the pace cannot keep up pace, but to improve our processes so we can, process as many complaints as possible. Those reasonable grounds, like I said, 22 in fiscal year 24, then we have the ability to file an enforcement action in court. And before we do that, we're required to try again at some type of settlement. And often cases are resulting in settlement at that point because parties have a benefit of a analysis from a lawyer and a summary of facts and all the investigative file information to see kind of how strong their cases are. And so there's kind of a filtering process in the beginning with an intake process where I do turn people away, even though they have a decent case. I turn them away because of resources, because we do not have the bandwidth for another case of this magnitude. And there's a filtering that happens at the end when we decide whether or not we're going to file this enforcement action. We don't have to file them. We're trying to be very selective in what we spend our time litigating.
Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to, so of the 22 that were found to have reasonable grounds, 7, you took 7 of those. I think I don't really, file, you were able to file 7 enforcement actions. So does that mean 7 of the 22? Or
Some of them may have had a case closure in fiscal year 23 because we have this like 6-month time period, but yes, there are cases that recently had a reasonable grounds determination. So that's the process. Should we switch gears to the budget? I think
Yes.
that's what I'm here to talk about.
Well, yes. And tell us what page you'd like us to go to. You're going to go back to 7?
Yeah, I think 7's the one.
Okay.
And I did do a summary of some of those statistics I just threw out at you on page 12 of like kind of the key points. And then you can drill down more if you're really interested in our annual report, which I think I shared last time I was here.
Yes, we have that. Thank you. And we posted it again today. So it's on as part of on our committee page.
So this is at page 7 is our, you guys call this one? The
ups and downs.
The ups and downs. I'm glad you're used to looking at this one because this one kind of hurts my brain sometimes with this is not the total number,
No,
right? It's just the
differences,
changes.
which is not always the most useful thing, but
So
we are.
yeah, so the big change is that it looks like we're having this big increase in salaries and wages, but that's actually just the position, the litigator position has been in this other category of other personal services for the past year. And Jason could explain that for you more if you wanted to, but the thought was to put that in with the salary and other benefit line items instead of it being this standalone
Sure.
budget item treated differently than all the other salaries and benefits.
Yeah, that was where my eye was drawn. So that makes sense. You're just moving it to the right spot.
And the other ups and down piece that I would highlight is that there is this vacancy turnover thing. So last year we had the 24,000 something vacancy turnover savings, and this year it's going up to 25 something. And I can show you where that is on the breakdown later on.
Yeah, because I'm seeing a down of $758.
Okay, well, maybe I have that wrong. Let me,
It's actually the opposite for vacancy savings. The down is actually an increase.
it hurts my brain.
Yes,
That doesn't make sense. So just identify yourself for the record, if you would, Jason.
sorry. Yeah, this is Jason Pienaar from the Agency of Administration Financial Services Division. And unlike all the other items you'll see on there, vacancy savings is different. It's the opposite. So a down is actually an up to vacancy savings, and an up is actually a down. So in this case, we're actually increasing our vacancy savings from 24,862 as it was passed in the 25 budget to 25,620 as we're recommending for the 26 budget. Excuse me.
So even though in budget adjustment, we had to put it back this year, right? Because you didn't have vacancy savings.
Correct.
So in the budget adjustment,
That's
there was an
correct.
adjustment for the lack of vacancy savings.
That is
Yeah.
We're
correct.
doing it again, you're being asked to do it again this year.
I'm being
That's
asked to do it again.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes. And I'm not sure how much detail you want about these different line items.
Probably all standard, whatever the,
There's really nothing to wiggle around with the salary benefits and the other operating expenses. There's no programmatic money that we're spending on anything other than sustaining our staff and having a building and having IT equipment. So like the bottom total number for the governor recommend of our budget of 1,135,000, over 1 million of that is salaries and benefits, and
sure.
the rest is operating expenses that we can't do anything about.
So you came to us at budget adjustment, with 3 positions, and we weren't able to make a decision during that because of it being the adjustment and not a new year. But I'm assuming the 3 positions you are still interested in, even though it's not the governor's recommend?
So just to clarify, it was 2 positions I was asking for in budget adjustment
Oh, okay.
this year for fiscal year 25. And those were the most minimal things that I need right now to be able to deal with the current backlog of about 100 people in an intake process with me and 30 unassigned investigations with another 10 that have been accepted and are just ready to start.
So one of the positions was another intake person.
Was a intake person, a full-time intake
Okay.
person.
Yeah.
And the second position that I was asking for in budget adjustment was another investigator to get us from 3 investigators to 4.
Okay.
And I am ready to assign a full caseload of cases to a new staff member as soon as they come, whenever that comes. And if it doesn't come, it means that these folks will just be waiting much longer. And at some point, I will have to say no to any new intakes because we can't just keep accepting cases that can't get closed out. So right now, like our staff are realistically able to settle or close between 1 and 2 cases per month, each investigator. So that's between 3 and 6 cases a month that have a determination or have a settlement. And I am trying my best not to accept more cases than that, but I get about 100 inquiries a month. So if I were to accept those and investigate those, we would just have this gigantic backlog. So I'm really careful about what I do accept.
So you're accepting maybe 6% or
Yes,
like getting into Harvard.
yes. And when we say no to people, they do not have other resources to go find a lawyer and represent them in their fair housing case. This is their only access to justice, to the justice system. Many of them are very poor and have disabilities and are facing other barriers because of their marginalization. And so they will not only not be getting services from us, but it also, I think, reduces the public's confidence in our operations and trust in our agency because they hear, oh, they wouldn't take my case. Oh, they wouldn't take my case. All they do is reject people. And so it diminishes our effectiveness in serving Vermonters the way we want.
So are some of these people as a result unhoused?
Yes, there are definitely many people who are unhoused who feel they have been denied housing or have had to leave discriminatory housing situations. So those are cases that I don't want to turn away, right? And I triage each day. How important is this case? What's going on in this person's life? Can we keep this case? But I have turned people away who are houseless.
And you're also, I don't know if you mentioned this earlier, but you're also receiving cases or recommendations or inquiries because, at least in this quarter, legal aid lost housing discrimination money. Is that right?
So legal aid sometimes represents complainants in our investigations. But what legal aid does is represent people who have cases with us They're not a substitute for our work. But because legal aid's funding has been limited, especially in their housing work, they have referred a lot more cases to us without being able to represent those folks. Which can make a case easier to process when people have lawyers, but a lot of folks don't.
How is legal aid limited? Is it just their budget?
Yes. And it's my impression that currently, right now, their housing discrimination project has no funding and they are shut down. They have a disability law project that still has funding, and they are representing complainants in some of our cases because they qualify under that funding stream.
So I think, to part of your question, Madam Chair, I did introduce a bill, H 38, which was, taken from conversations with big, just positions that are needed. So there's a request in H 38, and this was the basis of my question earlier today.
Yeah.
Which was, there's 6 full-time positions, 2 part-time positions with, matching estimates of what the salary and benefits and other costs would be to, essentially double the size of the Human Rights Commission as basically as an indicator of how much pressure they've been under and how many cases they have right now. And so that, I believe, has been assigned to general housing. But the question is, at some point, do we need to wait for a bill to come through the process to come to us? Or is there a way of working with the pool? And that's something we can investigate. But I think what, even before I was assigned this portfolio, even working with the Human Rights Commission, it was clear that their capacity is way underwater.
Yeah.
And so this was drawing out what they would need just to get to be not underwater.
Right.
That's, for people's reference, it's H 38.
Great.
And I did just at the last minute submit a memo outlining that need for those positions, and it has a description of what each of those positions would be able to do and how much they would cost. But I understand that probably I'll be testifying about that if that bill makes it to your committee this year. But I'm happy to talk about it now, or we'll just hold off. We'll put a little pin in that one.
Yeah, I think it's got a pin, and we'll figure out. I think this is sort of a to be continued kind of thing.
Yeah.
But we're aware of it. So,
Yeah, I think today is the most important part today is to understand what is and what the proposal is as it is. And anything that comes from that will be a future
So we
conversation.
have a good grounding in what the situation is. So thank you so much for coming in. I don't see any other questions. We appreciate your work and your time, and more to come.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Big. Thank you. So committee, that is it for this afternoon. As I mentioned earlier, the Department of Taxes will be here bright and early at 9 o'clock. Always interesting things going on. And then we have the Agency of Administration talking about their budget, the Defender General in the afternoon, Transportation, that's Transportation, that's John. DMV, who's that John also? Okay. And then at 4 o'clock, Sarah Clark, the Secretary of Administration, is going to come in and talk about what they're hearing and what they're thinking about regarding the uncertainty that is Washington these days. So it's going to be a full day. Rest up, bring snacks, drive safely, all you guys that are driving up